Now, Falcon is one of the biggest tributaries in the Foyle. So at the bottom of it is tidal, and then it goes up into countryside that is intensively farmed, moving up through a number of towns up into the headland. There's an awful lot of salmon and trout in it. It used to be a very good sea trout river, which means trout that actually spend part of their life at sea. But the sea trout population in Europe has collapsed, and it has collapsed in the Falkland as well. Salmon, unfortunately, has also collapsed throughout its range in Europe, and we're fairly sure that is something which is happening at sea, because salmon is a very good index species. In other words, it tells us about what's happening in the environment in freshwater and in saltwater, because it spends its youth in freshwater, goes back out into the sea to feed, and then comes back to spawn again. So we have a great indicator at the minute. That part of its life cycle in freshwater seems to be all right, but it's not surviving at sea. And what we're trying to figure out is what exactly is happening at sea. What we believe is happening, that salmon from the Falkland here and the Foyle, they go up off Greenland and Iceland to feed. And they feed in a thing called a thermic line, which is the cold water coming down from the north, meets the hot water coming up from the equator. And what it does is when one hits the other, the cold water's heritage goes down, and it brings up all these nutrients. So there's a lot of very small crustaceans feed along this line, and the salmon from here go up there to eat them. That's moved further north, 200 or 300 miles, so the fish aren't reaching it in any great numbers, so we're not getting the same return. The only way we can combat that is to manage the fish here in the freshwater system. And we do this by counting the amount of fish we get in. We then count how many fish actually spawn, which is what they do when they lay their eggs. And we do that by counting a thing called a red, which is a hole in the gravel that the female fish cuts with her tail. She lies sideways, and she flaps and she cuts a hole in the gravel, and she lays her eggs, and then they're fertilised by the male. So we count those till we have an idea how many fish are actually breeding. Then we come back after those eggs hatch, and those eggs hatch coming into the spring when the water gets a little warmer, and we do something called electric fishing, which means we pass an electric current through the water, which stuns the fish, and we actually examine the fish to see how many have hatched. And while we're doing that, we're seeing how many have hatched that year, the year before, and the year before that. Then, when they finish that part of the life cycle, they change from being freshwater fish to saltwater fish, and that's called smoltification. And we also check the smolts. Sometimes we catch them, and we tag them, or we just measure them to see what condition they're in, and away they go to sea again. That's that part of the salmon's life cycle. What we also look at is the water quality. We're always constantly trying to improve the water quality, so we monitor it all the time. We're taking samples by just observing it, and the other thing we're engaged in is to build in habitat units so that the different parts of the salmon's lifestyle, they have habitat to actually live in.